The grand dining hall at Windsor Castle had never felt so tense. Prince William sat across from his father, King Charles, while Camilla occupied her usual seat at the head of the table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. William had requested this private dinner, claiming he had something important to discuss. His father assumed it would be about royal duties or perhaps the children's education. He was wrong. William's hands trembled slightly as he set down his fork. For months he had been carrying a burden that grew heavier each day. The palace staff had been whispering, and what they shared with him had shattered his world. He looked at Camilla, who was delicately cutting her roast beef, seemingly unaware of the storm about to break. "Father," William began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart, "we need to talk about something serious, something that affects our entire family and the future of the monarchy." Charles raised an eyebrow, setting down his wine glass. "Of course, William. What's troubling you?" Camilla looked up, a slight smile playing on her lips. She had always found William's serious moments somewhat amusing, often joking privately about his tendency to be overly dramatic. Tonight, however, something in his eyes made her pause. William took a deep breath. The words he was about to speak would change everything. For weeks he had wrestled with whether to reveal what he had discovered. The evidence was undeniable, but the consequences would be devastating. His father had already endured so much scandal in his life, and here William was, about to add another chapter to the royal family's troubled history. "It's about Camilla," William said quietly, his eyes never leaving his father's face, "and her relationship with someone else." The color drained from Charles's face. Camilla's fork clattered against her plate, the sound echoing through the vast room like a gunshot. The air grew thick with tension as both parents stared at their son and heir to the throne. William had always been protective of his father. After the painful divorce from Diana and years of public scrutiny, Charles had finally found happiness with Camilla. Their marriage had brought stability to his life and respect to their union. William had eventually accepted Camilla as his stepmother, understanding that she made his father happy. But happiness built on lies was no happiness at all. The discovery had come by accident. William was reviewing security footage from various royal residences as part of his duties when he noticed something unusual. Camilla had been making frequent trips to a cottage in the Cotswolds, trips that weren't on her official schedule. When William investigated further, he discovered she had been meeting secretly with Marcus Thornfield, a wealthy businessman who had once been romantically linked to several high-profile women. At first, William hoped there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps it was business-related or charity work. But the private investigator he discreetly hired revealed the truth that shattered his hopes. The meetings were intimate, romantic, and had been going on for over 2 years. There were photographs, witness statements, and undeniable evidence of an affair that threatened everything the royal family stood for. "What exactly are you suggesting, William?" Camilla asked, her voice sharp and defensive. Her usual composure was cracking, and William could see the fear in her eyes. "I'm not suggesting anything," William replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. You've been having an affair with Marcus Thornfield for over 2 years. I have evidence, photographs, and witness statements. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Charles sat in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. The man who had waited decades to become king, who had endured public humiliation and criticism, was now facing another devastating betrayal. His hand shook as he reached for his wine glass, draining it in one gulp. Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "How dare you spy on me? How dare you invade my privacy like some common detective?" "Privacy?" William's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his composure. "You're the Queen Consort of England. Your actions reflect on the crown, on our family, on the institution my mother died serving. Privacy is a luxury you gave up when you married my father." The mention of Diana hung in the air like a dagger. Camilla's face went white, and for a moment she looked genuinely afraid. Charles closed his eyes as if trying to block out the words he had just heard. William continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've spent years accepting you, respecting you, defending you to those who questioned your place in our family. I watched my father's happiness and told myself that was enough. But I won't stand by and watch you destroy him the way she was destroyed." "That's enough," Charles finally spoke, his voice booming through the hall. "William, you will not speak to Camilla that way. These are serious accusations, and I won't have them thrown around without proper discussion. Then let's discuss them properly, William said, pulling out a manila envelope from his jacket. Everything is here, Father. Dates, times, locations, photographs. I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is overwhelming. Charles stared at the envelope as if it contained poison. His whole world was crumbling again, just as it had during his first marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now on the receiving end of infidelity, having once been the one conducting an affair. Camilla sank back into her chair, her defiance replaced by resignation. She knew the game was over. The careful life she had built, the respect she had slowly earned, the security she had found, all of it was about to disappear. She looked at Charles, the man she had claimed to love, and for the first time in years she felt genuine remorse. "Charles," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." But Charles wasn't looking at her. He was staring at William, seeing not just his son, but the future king who had just demonstrated the courage and integrity the monarchy desperately needed. In that moment, Charles realized that William's actions, painful as they were, came from a place of love and duty. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of betrayal, disappointment, and uncertain futures. Outside, the wind howled through the ancient trees surrounding the castle, as if nature itself was responding to the drama unfolding within those hallowed walls. Charles finally reached for the envelope with trembling hands. The weight of it seemed to hold the destruction of everything he had rebuilt after his divorce from Diana. His eyes scanned the documents while Camilla sat frozen, watching her world collapse in real time. William remained silent, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. The photographs were damning. Camilla and Marcus Thornfield embracing outside the cottage, sharing intimate dinners by candlelight, walking hand in hand through private gardens. The private investigator had been thorough, documenting months of secret meetings and romantic gestures that made Charles's stomach turn. 2 years, Charles whispered, his voice breaking. 2 years of lies. Camilla finally found her voice, though it was weak and desperate. "Charles, please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. Marcus and I, we're old friends. Yes, we've grown close, but it's not what you think." William scoffed, unable to contain his disgust. "Old friends don't book romantic getaways in Scotland. Old friends don't exchange love letters. Old friends don't plan secret weekend trips to Paris." He pulled out additional documents from the envelope. "Your credit card statements, hotel bookings, even the jewelry he bought you. Did you think no one would notice?" The jewelry comment hit Charles like a physical blow. He looked at Camilla's neck, where a delicate diamond necklace caught the light. She had told him it was a gift from her sister for their anniversary. Another lie in an endless web of deception. Charles stood slowly, his movements mechanical and controlled. At 75, he had endured more personal humiliation than any man should bear. But this felt different. This felt like the final betrayal that would either break him or transform him into the king he was meant to be. "How long have you known?" Charles asked William, his voice eerily calm. 3 weeks, William replied honestly. "I needed time to gather all the evidence to be absolutely certain before I brought this to you. I also needed time to think about what this means for the monarchy." Camilla stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward. "The monarchy? This is about our marriage, our personal life. Not everything is about the bloody crown. Everything we do is about the crown." William shot back, his composure finally cracking. "Every choice, every relationship, every public appearance represents something bigger than ourselves. You knew that when you married my father. You knew that when you became queen consort. And you certainly knew that when you decided to betray him." Charles walked to the massive windows overlooking the castle grounds. The weight of his position had never felt heavier. He was a king, a symbol of stability and moral authority, yet his personal life was once again in shambles. The public had just begun to truly accept Camilla, and now this scandal threatened to destroy not just his marriage, but the reputation of the entire royal family. "What do you want me to do, William?" Charles asked without turning around. "What would you have your king do?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. William had spent his entire life preparing to be king, but he had never imagined having to make such a decision about his own family. He looked at Camilla, who was now crying silently, her mascara creating dark streams down her cheeks. "I want you to think about what's best for the country. For the institution and for yourself, William said carefully. The public has already endured decades of royal scandals. They deserve better from us. Camilla suddenly erupted with fury, her grief transforming into rage. You sanctimonious little boy! You think you're so perfect, so pure? You've never had to fight for love, never had to wait decades for happiness. You were handed everything on a silver platter because of who your mother was. Don't you dare bring my mother into this! William's voice was dangerously low. She died serving this institution with dignity and grace. She never betrayed my father's trust, never lied to the public, never made a mockery of her vows. Your precious mother wasn't perfect either, Camilla screamed, all pretense of dignity abandoned. She had her own secrets, her own relationships after the divorce. Charles spun around, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Camilla. Diana was divorced when she had other relationships. You are married to the King of England. The mention of his title seemed to awaken something in Charles. For years he had been Prince Charles, the heir waiting in the wings. But he was King Charles now, and with that title came responsibilities that transcended personal happiness. William watched his father's transformation with fascination and sadness. He could see the man struggling with the monarch, personal desires battling with royal duty. It was a conflict William himself would face one day, but he had hoped it wouldn't be under such circumstances. I need time to think, Charles said finally. This conversation ends here for tonight. Camilla, you will remain in your quarters until we can discuss this properly. William, I want to see all the evidence again in my study at 9 tomorrow morning. Camilla looked at both men with desperation. Charles, please, don't let him destroy us. We can work through this. People make mistakes. We can go to counseling, we can fix this. Charles looked at his wife with a mixture of love and disgust. Part of him wanted to forgive her, to find a way to salvage their marriage and maintain the stability he had fought so hard to achieve. But the larger part, the part that was now truly king, knew that some betrayals were too profound to overcome. You made your choice, Camilla, he said quietly. Now I have to make mine. As Camilla left the dining hall, her sobs echoing through the corridors, William and his father stood in heavy silence. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, each one marking the end of an era and the beginning of something unknown. You did the right thing, Charles said finally, not looking at his son. Did I? William asked, genuine doubt in his voice. I've just destroyed your marriage, possibly damaged the monarchy, and caused immense pain to everyone involved. Charles turned to face his heir, and for the first time in years, William saw not his father but his king. You told the truth, Charles said simply. In a world full of lies and compromise, you chose truth. That's what a king does. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Both men understood that this moment would define not just their relationship, but the future of the crown itself. The next morning arrived gray and somber, matching the mood that had settled over Windsor Castle like a heavy blanket. Charles had barely slept, spending most of the night walking the corridors of his ancestral home, wrestling with decisions that would affect not just his family, but the entire nation. The weight of the crown had never felt more literal than it did in those dark hours before dawn. William arrived at his father's study precisely at 9, carrying additional files and a heavy heart. He had spent the night questioning every decision that led to this moment, wondering if there had been another way to handle the situation, but each time he considered staying silent, he thought about the oath he would one day take as king, the promise to serve his people with honesty and integrity. Charles was already seated behind his massive oak desk, the one that had belonged to his grandfather, King George VI. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across his face, making him look older and more fragile than William had ever seen him. Sit down, William, Charles said without looking up from the documents spread before him. I've been reviewing everything you brought me last night. William took his usual chair across from the desk, noticing how formal this felt compared to their typical father-son conversations. This wasn't Charles the father speaking to William the son. This was King Charles addressing the heir to the throne. I've also been in contact with our security team and legal advisors, Charles continued, finally meeting William's eyes. They've confirmed the authenticity of everything you've presented. There's no question about what's been happening. The confirmation hit William harder than he expected. Part of him had hoped there might be some explanation, some misunderstanding that could make this nightmare disappear, but the evidence was overwhelming. and now they had to deal with the consequences. "Have you spoken to Camilla?" William asked carefully. Charles's jaw tightened. She spent most of the night trying to justify her actions. According to her, Marcus Thornfield represents everything I can't give her. Freedom, spontaneity, a life without constant scrutiny. She claims she still loves me, but needed something that was entirely her own. William felt a surge of anger at Camilla's selfishness. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that when she married me, she didn't just marry a man. She married an institution, a responsibility, a way of life that millions of people look to for stability and moral guidance." Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I told her that her need for personal fulfillment doesn't justify betraying the trust of an entire nation." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Charles's private secretary entered with a worried expression. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation. The tabloids have gotten wind of something. They're calling about rumors of marital problems and requesting statements." William's stomach dropped. If the press had caught even a whisper of this scandal, it would explode into a media frenzy that could devastate the monarchy. The British public had just begun to fully accept Camilla as queen consort, and another royal infidelity scandal would drag up painful memories of Charles and Diana's troubled marriage. "How much do they know?" Charles asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Not much detail yet, sir, but they're asking specific questions about the queen consort's recent travel, and whether there are any marital difficulties. It seems someone has been talking." Charles and William exchanged knowing looks. In a palace filled with staff, it was impossible to keep secrets completely contained. Someone had noticed Camilla's unusual behavior, her mysterious trips, her distracted demeanor, and had started talking. "Give me 24 hours, Charles told his secretary. "I'll have a statement ready by then." After the secretary left, Charles returned to his desk with renewed determination. "William, I need you to understand something. The decision I'm about to make isn't just about my marriage or my personal feelings. It's about the future of the monarchy and what kind of institution we want to pass on to your children." William nodded, sensing that his father had reached a conclusion during the long, sleepless night. "I'm going to ask Camilla to leave," Charles said simply. "Not just the palace, but the country. I'm going to offer her a generous settlement and a home in France, where she can live quietly and privately. In return, she'll agree to a discreet divorce and never speak publicly about our marriage or this situation." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. William had expected consequences, but he hadn't anticipated such a decisive and final solution. "Are you certain that's what you want?" William asked, searching his father's face for any sign of doubt. Charles was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk. "William, I'm 75 years old. I waited my entire life to become king, and I've been on the throne for less than 3 years. I won't let personal scandal overshadow my reign or damage the institution I've sworn to protect." There was something different in his father's voice, a strength and resolution that William had rarely heard before. The heartbroken husband was being replaced by a determined monarch who understood that some sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. "What about the public announcement?" William asked. "How do we explain this without creating more scandal?" Charles had clearly thought about this as well. "We'll announce that the queen consort has decided to step back from public duties due to health concerns. She'll gradually fade from public view over the next few months, and then we'll quietly announce that we've decided to live separately for personal reasons. No details, no blame, no drama." William admired his father's strategic thinking, but he also felt a deep sadness for the pain this would cause. Despite everything, Charles had genuinely loved Camilla, and losing her would leave another scar on his already wounded heart. "And what about you?" William asked gently. "How will you handle being alone again?" Charles smiled sadly, the first genuine emotion he had shown all morning. "I'll do what I've always done, William. I'll serve my people, support my family, and find purpose in duty rather than personal happiness. It's what kings do." The resignation in his father's voice broke William's heart, but he also felt immense pride. This was the king the country needed, a man who could put duty before personal desire, who could make difficult decisions for the greater good. "There's something else," Charles continued. "I want you to take on more responsibilities. This situation has reminded me that the monarchy needs stability and strength. You're ready to shoulder more of the burden, and the people need to see that the future of the crown is secure. William felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a royal robe. He had always known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to arrive under such circumstances. "I won't let you down," William said solemnly. "I know you won't," Charles replied. "You've already proven that by bringing this situation to my attention. It took courage and integrity, the very qualities a king needs most." As they prepared to face the difficult conversations and decisions ahead, both men understood that this crisis had fundamentally changed their relationship and their roles within the monarchy. The future had arrived sooner than expected, and they would have to be ready. The confrontation with Camilla came that afternoon in the Queen's private sitting room, a space that had once been filled with laughter and intimate conversations, but now felt cold and formal. Charles had requested that William be present as a witness, understanding that whatever happened next would need to be documented and remembered accurately. Camilla sat rigidly in her favorite armchair, the same one where she had planned charity events and written personal letters to friends. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by the look of a woman who knew her world was about to end. She had dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress, perhaps hoping to remind Charles of better times, but her red-rimmed eyes betrayed the tears she had shed throughout the sleepless night. "Camilla," Charles began, his voice formal and distant, "William and I have discussed the situation thoroughly, and I've made my decision." She looked between the two men, searching for any sign of mercy or forgiveness. "Charles, please. Before you say anything, let me explain what happened. Let me tell you about Marcus and why I made these terrible choices." "I don't need explanations," Charles replied firmly. "Your actions speak clearly enough. What I need is your cooperation in resolving this situation with dignity and discretion." Camilla's face crumpled as she realized there would be no forgiveness, no second chance, no opportunity to repair what she had broken. "You're leaving me," she whispered. "After everything we've been through, you're just throwing it all away." William watched his father struggle with the accusation. He could see the love and pain warring in Charles's eyes, the conflict between the husband who had once adored this woman and the king who couldn't overlook such a betrayal. "You threw it away the moment you decided to betray our marriage," Charles said quietly. "I'm simply dealing with the consequences of your choices." Camilla stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens where she had spent so many peaceful mornings. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Marcus was just supposed to be a friend, someone who understood what it was like to live outside of all this royal protocol and responsibility. But he became more than a friend. William interjected, his voice cold. "He became your lover, your confidant, your escape from the life you chose when you married my father." Camilla spun around, her sadness transforming into defensive anger. "You have no idea what it's like to live in this fishbowl. Every move scrutinized, every conversation monitored, every decision weighed against how it will affect the precious monarchy." "No, I don't," William admitted. "But I know what it's like to be born into this life, to have duty and responsibility thrust upon you from birth. The difference is, I've never used those pressures as an excuse to betray the people who depend on me." Charles raised his hand, stopping the argument before it could escalate further. "This isn't about blame or justification. This is about moving forward in a way that protects the institution and preserves what dignity we can salvage from this situation." He walked to his desk and retrieved a folder containing legal documents that had been prepared overnight by the royal attorneys. "I'm offering you a generous settlement, Camilla. A home in the French countryside, an annual allowance that will ensure you live comfortably for the rest of your life, and complete privacy to pursue whatever relationships you choose." Camilla stared at the folder as if it contained poison. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for your agreement to a quiet divorce, your immediate departure from all royal residences, and your permanent silence about this situation and our marriage," Charles replied. "You'll also relinquish all titles and claims to royal privileges." The terms were generous but final. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no gradual transition. Camilla was being given a golden parachute out of royal life, but once she took it, there would be no returning. "What about Marcus?" she asked quietly. "What happens to him?" William pulled out another document from his briefcase. "Marcus Thornfield has been made aware of the situation. He's agreed to end all contact with you and has signed a confidentiality agreement. He understands that any attempt to profit from this situation, or go public with details of your relationship, will result in serious legal consequences. Camilla sank back into her chair, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. The man she had risked everything for had abandoned her the moment things became complicated. She was alone, facing the destruction of her life and status with nowhere to turn. "How long do I have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The public announcement of your retirement from royal duties will be made tomorrow," Charles replied. "You have 1 week to make your personal arrangements and say your private goodbyes. After that, you'll leave England quietly." The finality of it all was overwhelming. 7 days to pack up a life, to say goodbye to friends and staff who had become family, to leave behind the role she had fought so hard to establish and the respect she had slowly earned from the British people. "Charles," she said, looking directly at her husband with tears streaming down her face. "Despite everything that's happened, despite the mistakes I've made, I want you to know that I did love you. I still love you." Charles's composure cracked for just a moment, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know you did, Camilla. And I loved you too. That's what makes this so devastating." William felt like an intruder in this moment of raw emotion between his father and stepmother. Despite his anger at Camilla's betrayal, he couldn't help but feel sorry for both of them. Love and duty had collided with devastating results, leaving destruction in their wake. "Will I ever see you again?" Camilla asked, her voice breaking. Charles was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Perhaps someday, when enough time has passed and wounds have healed, we might be able to meet as old friends. But not as husband and wife. That chapter of our lives is closed forever." Camilla nodded, understanding that this was as much hope as she could expect. She signed the documents with shaking hands, each signature sealing her fate and ending her brief reign as queen consort. As she prepared to leave the room that had been her sanctuary, she turned to William one last time. "Take care of him," she said simply. "He's a good man who deserves better than what I gave him." William nodded, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "I will." After Camilla left, Charles and William sat in heavy silence, both processing what had just occurred. The deed was done, the decision made, the consequences set in motion. Now they had to face the challenges of moving forward and protecting the monarchy from the scandal that threatened to engulf it. "Are you all right?" William asked his father gently. Charles straightened his shoulders, transforming once again from heartbroken husband to resolute king. "I will be," he said firmly. "We both will be. This institution has survived worse storms than this, and it will survive this one too." Outside, the sun was setting over Windsor Castle, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in the royal family's long and complicated history. The week that followed was a masterclass in royal crisis management. Charles moved with the precision of a man who had learned from decades of public scrutiny and personal scandal. Every detail was carefully orchestrated, every statement crafted to minimize damage while maintaining the dignity of the crown. The first public announcement came on a Tuesday morning, delivered through the official royal channels with characteristic understatement. The Queen Consort will be stepping back from her public duties to focus on her health and personal well-being. Her Majesty the King asks for privacy and understanding during this difficult time. The British press immediately sensed there was more to the story, but the palace's tight control of information kept speculation to a minimum. Charles had learned from past mistakes that feeding the media frenzy only made situations worse. This time silence and swift action would be his weapons. William watched his father navigate the crisis with newfound respect. The man who had once been criticized for his emotional outbursts and poor judgment was now demonstrating the wisdom that came from hard-earned experience. Every decision was calculated, every move designed to protect not just his own reputation, but the institution he had sworn to serve. Behind the scenes, Camilla was quietly packing her belongings and saying her farewells. The staff who had served her loyally were shocked by her sudden departure, but years of royal service had taught them not to ask uncomfortable questions. They accepted the official explanation of health concerns and wished her well, unaware of the scandal that had precipitated her exit. On Thursday, Charles made his next strategic move. He called a private meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister, and senior members of Parliament. Without revealing the specific details of Camilla's betrayal, he informed them that his marriage was ending, and that significant changes to royal protocols would be necessary. The Archbishop, a man who had officiated at Charles and Camilla's wedding, was visibly shaken by the news. "Your Majesty, surely there must be some way to reconcile this situation. Marriage is a sacred bond that should not be broken lightly." Charles appreciated the Archbishop's concern, but his decision was final. "I understand your position, Archbishop, but some betrayals cut too deep to heal. I've given this careful consideration and prayer, and I believe separation is the only path forward that preserves the integrity of the crown." The Prime Minister, a pragmatic woman who had dealt with numerous political scandals, was more supportive. "Your Majesty, while I'm sorry for your personal difficulties, I believe your decisive action demonstrates the strength and moral authority the country needs from its monarch. The public will respect your commitment to doing what's right, even when it's painful." William attended these meetings as his father's advisor and eventual successor, learning valuable lessons about leadership and crisis management. He watched Charles balance personal pain with public duty, never allowing his emotions to override his judgment or compromise his position as king. By Friday, the carefully planned narrative was taking shape in the public consciousness. Camilla's health concerns explained her withdrawal from royal duties, while Charles's increased public appearances demonstrated his commitment to continuing his work despite personal challenges. The story was sad but not scandalous, difficult but not devastating. The most challenging moment came when Charles had to tell his younger son, Harry, about the situation. Harry had always had a complicated relationship with Camilla, never fully accepting her as a replacement for his mother, but he had eventually made peace with her place in their father's life. "She did what?" Harry's voice crackled through the secure phone line from California, where he was living with his own family. "After everything our family has been through, after all the work we've done to rebuild trust and respect, she throws it all away for some random businessman?" Charles found himself in the unusual position of defending his decision to divorce rather than justifying his marriage. "Harry, I know this is difficult to understand, but sometimes people make choices that force us to respond in ways we never imagined. Your brother acted with courage and integrity in bringing this to my attention. William knew about this before me." Harry's voice carried hurt alongside anger. "William discovered the situation and handled it appropriately," Charles explained. "He gave me the information I needed to make an informed decision about my marriage and my responsibilities as king. The conversation with Harry was painful but necessary." Despite their past disagreements and Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, he was still Charles's son and deserved to know the truth about what was happening to their family. Meanwhile, William was taking on increased responsibilities with remarkable grace and competence. He stepped in to cover many of Camilla's former duties, attending charity events and public functions with renewed energy and purpose. The British public, always observant of royal dynamics, began to notice the seamless transition in William's enhanced role. At a veterans' charity dinner on Saturday night, William delivered a speech that subtly addressed the ongoing situation, without mentioning it directly. In times of challenge and change, we discover what truly matters. We learn that institutions built on solid foundations can weather any storm. We find that truth and integrity, though sometimes painful, are always worth defending. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. William wasn't just filling in for his stepmother. He was stepping into his role as the future king with confidence and authority that impressed even the most cynical observers. Behind the scenes, Charles was quietly proud of his son's performance. William had not only done the right thing by exposing Camilla's betrayal, but he was now proving himself capable of handling the increased responsibilities that would come with being heir to the throne of a modern constitutional monarchy. As the week drew to a close, Camilla made her final preparations to leave England. Her belongings were packed, her new home in France was ready, and her future was secured but solitary. She had traded the excitement of her secret affair for exile from the only life she had known for the past 20 years. On Sunday morning, she had one final conversation with Charles in his private study. They spoke quietly and civilly, two people who had once loved each other deeply but could no longer share a life together. "I hope you find peace, Camilla," Charles said as they prepared to part ways forever. "I hope you find happiness again," she replied, meaning every word despite her own pain. As her car pulled away from Windsor Castle for the last time, Camilla looked back at the ancient stones and majestic towers that had been her home. She had arrived as a controversial figure who gradually won acceptance and respect. She was leaving as a woman who had gambled everything on passion and lost. Charles watched from his window as the car disappeared down the long driveway, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. A chapter of his life was ending, but perhaps a better one was about to begin. 3 months had passed since Camilla's quiet departure from England, and the transformation within the royal family was remarkable. Charles had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed vigor, as if the weight of his troubled marriage had been lifting a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. His public appearances were more confident, his speeches more passionate, and his connection with the British people stronger than it had been in years. The official announcement of the separation came exactly 12 weeks after Camilla left, delivered with the same understated precision that had characterized the entire affair. His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort have mutually agreed to live separately. They ask for privacy and understanding as they navigate this personal matter. The public reaction was surprisingly supportive. Rather than scandal and gossip, there was an outpouring of sympathy for Charles and admiration for how the situation had been handled. The British people, having endured decades of royal drama, appreciated the dignity and discretion with which this latest chapter had been managed. William had seamlessly stepped into his expanded role, taking on responsibilities that went far beyond what was typically expected of an heir to the throne. He was essentially functioning as a co-monarch, sharing the burden of royal duties in a way that allowed Charles to focus on the most important ceremonial and constitutional functions, while William handled much of the day-to-day engagement with various organizations and causes. The changes were particularly evident during the weekly audiences with the Prime Minister. William now attended these meetings regularly, contributing insights and asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his growing understanding of statecraft and governance. The Prime Minister, initially skeptical of including the heir in such sensitive discussions, had become one of William's strongest supporters. "Your son is going to make an exceptional king," she told Charles after one particularly productive meeting. "He has the perfect combination of his mother's emotional intelligence and your father's sense of duty." Charles beamed with pride at the assessment. Watching William mature into his role had been one of the few bright spots during the difficult months following Camilla's departure. The crisis had forced both men to grow in ways they hadn't expected, strengthening their relationship and preparing them for the future of the monarchy. The international community had also taken notice of the changes within the British royal family. Foreign dignitaries and heads of state began requesting meetings specifically with William, recognizing him as increasingly influential in shaping Britain's role on the world stage. His natural charisma and obvious competence made him an effective ambassador for British interests and values. During a state visit from the President of France, William delivered a speech in fluent French that impressed everyone present. The president later told Charles, "Your son represents the best of both tradition and modernity. He honors the past while embracing the future." But perhaps the most significant change was in Charles himself. Free from the stress and complications of his troubled marriage, he had rediscovered his passion for the causes he cared about most deeply. His environmental advocacy became more focused and effective, his charitable work more hands-on and personal, and his role as head of the Commonwealth more engaged and meaningful. At a climate summit in Edinburgh, Charles delivered what many considered the finest speech of his reign. He spoke with authority and passion about the urgent need for environmental action, drawing on decades of advocacy and his position as a world leader to challenge other nations to take bold steps toward sustainability. "We have inherited this planet from our ancestors and hold it in trust for our children," he declared to the assembled delegates. "Future generations will judge us not by our wealth or power, but by our willingness to protect the only home we have." The speech received a standing ovation and was praised internationally as a defining moment in environmental diplomacy. More importantly for Charles, it reminded him of his purpose and the unique platform his position provided to make a real difference in the world. William watched his father's renaissance with deep satisfaction, knowing that his difficult decision to expose Camilla's betrayal had ultimately freed Charles to become the king he was meant to be. The personal cost had been enormous, but the institutional benefit was becoming clearer with each passing day. The relationship between father and son had evolved into something closer to a true partnership. They consulted each other on major decisions, shared insights from their respective experiences, and worked together to modernize and strengthen the monarchy for future generations. During their weekly private dinners, which had replaced the formal family meals of the past, they often discussed the lessons learned from recent events and how those experiences could inform their approach to royal duty. "I've been thinking about what you said that night when you brought me the evidence about Camilla," Charles said during one such dinner, "about how everything we do represents something bigger than ourselves. I think I lost sight of that during my marriage. I became too focused on personal happiness and not focused enough on institutional responsibility." William considered his father's words carefully before responding. "I think you needed that happiness, Father. After everything you went through with Mother, after years of criticism and scrutiny, you deserved to find love and companionship. The problem wasn't that you sought happiness. The problem was that Camilla couldn't handle the responsibilities that came with that happiness." The conversation touched on themes that would have been impossible to discuss. While Camilla was still part of their lives, both men were beginning to understand how her presence had complicated family dynamics and royal protocols in ways they hadn't fully appreciated at the time. "Do you ever regret what you did?" Charles asked directly. "Do you ever wonder if there was another way to handle the situation that might have saved my marriage?" William had asked himself the same question countless times over the past 3 months. The answer had become clearer as he watched the positive changes in his father and the royal family as a whole. "No," he said firmly. "I regret that it was necessary and I regret the pain it caused you. But I don't regret doing what was right for the crown and for the country. A marriage built on lies and betrayal could never have survived anyway, and the longer it continued, the more damage it would have caused to all of us." Charles nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his son's words. The crisis had been painful, but it had also been a cleansing force that allowed them to move forward with clarity and purpose. As autumn settled over Britain, the royal family was stronger and more unified than it had been in years. The challenges ahead would be different from those they had faced in the past, but they would meet them together, guided by the hard-won knowledge that truth and duty must always triumph over personal convenience and comfort. 1 year later, the transformation of the British monarchy was complete and undeniable. Charles stood at the podium in Westminster Abbey, delivering his annual address to the nation, looking more confident and authoritative than he had at any point since becoming king. The man who had once been seen as a placeholder monarch, destined to be overshadowed by his legendary mother and future king's son, had found his voice and his purpose. The speech was being watched by millions around the world, but Charles's eyes found William in the front row, sitting with Catherine and their children. The heir to the throne had become his father's closest advisor and most trusted partner, transforming what could have been a transitional reign into something much more significant. This past year has reminded us that strength comes not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with courage and integrity, Charles said, his words carrying weight earned through personal experience. When we choose truth over comfort, duty over convenience, and service over self-interest, we discover that we are capable of more than we ever imagined. The audience responded with sustained applause, but the words held special meaning for the royal family. They were a testament to the journey they had traveled together. From the dark night when William revealed Camilla's betrayal to this moment of triumph and renewal. After the ceremony, Charles and William walked together through the grounds of Buckingham Palace, a tradition they had established during the rebuilding process. These private moments away from cameras and protocol allowed them to speak freely about the challenges and opportunities ahead. "I received a letter from Camilla last week," Charles mentioned casually, surprising William with both the information and his matter-of-fact delivery. "Really? How is she?" William asked, genuinely curious about his former stepmother's well-being. "She sounds peaceful," Charles replied. "She's living quietly in Provence, tending a garden, writing her memoirs for her family rather than publication. She says she's finally found the simple life she always claimed to want." William sensed there was more to the story. "Did she say anything about everything that happened?" Charles smiled slightly, the first time William had seen him display anything other than pain when discussing his former wife. She thanked me for handling the situation with dignity. She said she understood why I had to make the choices I made, and she expressed no bitterness about the consequences of her actions. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, both men reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed since that fateful dinner, when the truth was finally revealed. "Do you miss her?" William asked carefully. Charles considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "I miss the woman I thought she was. I miss the companionship and the shared experiences we had, but I don't miss the stress of wondering what was real and what was performance. I don't miss the feeling that something was always slightly wrong, even when I couldn't identify what it was." The honesty of his father's response touched William deeply. Charles had not only survived the betrayal and separation, he had used it as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. The king who emerged from the crisis was more authentic and effective than the man who had entered it. "The country has noticed the change in you," William observed. "The approval ratings for the monarchy are at their highest levels in decades. People respect how you've handled everything." Charles appreciated the feedback, but his focus had shifted beyond public opinion to something more substantial. "I think people respond to authenticity, William. When you're trying to maintain a facade or protect a lie, it shows in everything you do. When you're free to be genuine, to focus on your real purpose and responsibilities, people sense that too." They were interrupted by the arrival of Catherine and the grandchildren, who had been exploring the palace gardens under the watchful eye of their security detail. Prince George, now a confident young man, approached his grandfather with a question about the ceremony they had just witnessed. "Grandpapa, why did you say that choosing truth over comfort makes us stronger? Isn't truth sometimes more painful than comfort?" Charles knelt down to his grandson's level, recognizing a teachable moment that would help shape the future king's understanding of leadership and responsibility. "Truth is often more painful than comfort, George," he said gently. "But pain that comes from truth leads to healing and growth, while comfort built on lies eventually collapses and causes much greater pain. A king must always choose the harder path if it's the right path." William watched this interaction with deep satisfaction, seeing his father pass on the lessons learned through hard experience to the next generation. The monarchy was not just surviving the recent crisis, it was using it as a foundation for wisdom and strength that would serve the institution for decades to come. Later that evening, Charles hosted a private dinner for the immediate family, including Harry, who had flown in from California for the anniversary celebration. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed, a stark contrast to the tense formal meals that had characterized the Camilla era. During dessert, Harry raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To my father, who showed us that a king's greatest strength is his willingness to make difficult decisions for the good of his people and his family. And to my brother, who proved that sometimes love means telling uncomfortable truths." The toast surprised everyone, particularly given Harry's historically complicated relationship with both his father and brother. But the crisis and its resolution had brought clarity to family dynamics that had been clouded by years of unresolved tensions and competing loyalties. "I know I haven't always been the most supportive son or brother," Harry continued, his voice emotional but steady. "But watching how you both handled this situation with courage and integrity has reminded me what our family truly stands for. I'm proud to be part of this legacy." Charles felt tears welling in his eyes as he looked around the table at his sons, his daughter-in-law, and his grandchildren. The personal cost of the past year had been enormous, but it had also brought unexpected gifts in the form of renewed family bonds and clearer understanding of their shared purpose. As the evening wound down and the family prepared to part ways, William lingered to have one final private moment with his father. "Are you happy?" William asked simply. Charles considered the question in all its complexity. "I'm fulfilled," he said finally. "I'm serving my purpose, contributing to something larger than myself and surrounded by people I love and trust. That feels like a deeper and more sustainable kind of happiness than I've ever experienced before." William nodded, understanding exactly what his father meant. The journey from that devastating revelation to this moment of peace and purpose had taught them both valuable lessons about leadership, family, and the true meaning of service. As Charles prepared for bed that night in his private chambers, he reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed his reign and his life. The crown that had once felt like a burden now felt like a calling, and the future that had once seemed uncertain now appeared bright with possibility. The truth had indeed set them free, and from that freedom had come a strength and purpose that would define the monarchy for generations to come. William's courage in speaking that truth had saved not just Charles's personal dignity, but the integrity of the institution they both served. It was a gift that could never be repaid, only honored through continued faithful service to the people they had sworn to protect and lead.